Thank you very much for being here. And Alaina is the Chief IP Enforcement Officer at U.S. Customs. So you have a front row seat for what goes on. We got a lot of questions in the last panel about what goes on at U.S. Customs.
hmm
And maybe we can just start with a very basic question, and go from there. Why is border protection so enforcement? Why is border enforcement so important?
Well, this is such a good segue from this last panel because, we touched on a lot of these broad topics, but generally, and I believe I said it in the last segment, it's just that the hard goods is where everything happens. So, even though online enforcement is so important, we're really focusing on the hard goods that are coming across the border. And so, every sovereign country has a very vested government interest in controlling what comes into the country, and with that kind of responsibility and authority, there's pretty robust enforcement tools that are available, and that's no exception, with the U.S. Customs, in that we really have an abundant ability to take action against imports that we deem IP infringing.
Hmm. Yeah, and so can you tell us, does what does global border enforcement protection look like, and how does the U.S. fit into that piece? Because in the last panel, we talked a lot about sort of what goes on globally, and those of you who were with us for the last panel, you heard us try and catch it in China, but in China they catch
hmm
about 1%. Which that number was really depressing to me, and then you catch another. They didn't really give us a percentage in the Middle East, but how much do you suppose you catch in the U.S. and how does the U.S. fit into the global border protection?
Sure. I love this question. This is actually what I did my LLM research on. My thesis was on comparative legal enforcement regimes for IP border enforcement. But regarding that 1% statistic, I believe, I forgot who said it. It was Paulo
Yeah,
or
I think
Jens, but
Paulo.
I believe what he meant is that they seize 1%
Okay,
of outgoing cargo. So, and that is an enormous amount if you think about how much exportation comes out
right.
of China. It cannot be evaluated what percentage of counterfeit merchandise they seize. So I think that 1% was just about the quantity of the cargo
Oh,
that
I
is
see.
actually
Okay, so
stopped. And
okay, because that makes sense because he said that's about 20% of your effort. And I'm like, well, how is 1% seizure 20% of your effort?
yeah, and so I love that we've kind of delved into this strategy of, like, start working with China customs, then
Mm,
look to the major transshipment points, and there are a number of ports in Europe, and there are a number of ports in the Middle East. Get a robust customs enforcement program going there, and then the last stop is the United States. You mentioned that it is the largest economy,
mhm.
and US households consume 25% of the world's consumer products, which is enormous.
That is an
And so
enormous number.
it
Yeah.
is enormous. We are consumers, and we have the most robust consumer economy in the world, and so that's why these goods end up on our shores.
Well, and
It
it's
makes
also
sense.
why when you have a recession, the consumer confidence is so important. Because we are a consumer based economy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So, and I didn't realize that we were accounted for 25% of the world's.
Yep.
I mean, that's just a staggering number. Do you happen to know? I mean, and if you don't know, that's fine. But what amount of counterfeit percentage does the U.S. account for?
Consuming,
Yeah,
I'm not sure, because it's like that's a typical problem with any criminology study, is that
yeah,
you don't know how much you're missing.
right,
So
right,
statistics are scarce.
yeah.
But as far as consuming, there are multiple research studies that have been done where you query, a certain population of the US a certain percentage population of the United States about their purchasing activities. And in the US, I know for a fact that people admit to
Yeah.
stealing copyright material from online,
Hmm.
but it is it, there isn't such a demand for counterfeit products, I would say, in the US, is that people do want the real thing.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of it is unwittingly purchasing, through because of e-commerce and the online ads. Um, that's what we see a lot. And the IPR Center deals more with consumer complaints, than my agency does.
Hmm.
And a lot of it is based on like unintentionally purchasing, and then
Yeah.
consumers being really upset about it.
Well, right. I mean, I personally, and I won't name any names, but I personally have stopped buying from certain platforms because you just can't
Myself
know.
as well.
You know,
Yeah.
you used to be able to tell, but now the ads are identical, and the reviews just are not helpful. And so e-commerce, somebody's got to come up with a better solution than what is going on, because I mean, I guess that it's still the cash cow, but I can see a universe in the not too distant future where it has just burnt itself out for failure
Mm-hmm.
to self-regulate,
Mm-hmm.
because of so many problems. The counterfeiting being a huge problem, because you, particularly when you're buying online. I mean, I suppose one of the things. So I'm in the market for a variety of different things right now, and I suppose I can can say we're about ready to make a major announcement here, and we're going to be getting some office/event space. So we're in the market for finding that kind of furniture to build that out and that sort of thing. So I've been looking, and you see sometimes it's like furniture that is like a quarter of the cost of other
Mm-hmm.
places. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not buying from that outlet, because that has to be fraud. And then you go and you do look at the reviews for those places, and they're terrible.
Uh-huh.
And what are people to do? What are consumers supposed to do? I mean, what is your advice? I mean, what do you? I mean,
Like, I'm just as as a person, so of course not speaking in my capacity. Sorry, we're so green here that the lights go off if there's no movement. um Not speaking in my capacity as a government employee, but just as a consumer, I'm willing to pay the extra, couple of
mm,
dollars, or to go to either directly to the brand owner or to a brick and mortar, or to an online seller that I trust. And
yeah,
there are certain platforms that are very different, and like their business operation is different, and the way that they vet potential sellers are different. And I think that consumers need to do a little bit of research and identify who those people are, and just make the decision, and make I think it's a very educated decision to say I'm willing to pay a little bit extra to know that I'm going to get a legitimate product. And I mean, we all know there's lots of other harms that flow with the purchase, of a counterfeit good. It's not just that you'll be disappointed and you didn't get the real thing. There is, you have to look at how these are produced and where they're produced.
mm,
The actual harmfulness of the actual product, whether it's dangerous. And especially with consumer electronics, there is a national security concern. There have been
yeah,
articles, this is public information, that like counterfeit cell phones had surveillance technology in it.
hmm
And that should be terrifying to consumers, and sway them a little bit towards getting in your car, go to the mall, right? Like,
yep.
getting out of your house is probably a good thing to begin with, because we've been cooped up for so many years.
Right, right. No, I agree. I've found that you have to buy from reputable sellers and reputable places, and if it costs a little bit more, then it's worth it in the long run. And but I look at some of the statistics, and it's shocking how many people still would knowingly buy something that would be counterfeit if they could save money. And I think that number is going down, I believe.
I think so too. The research has shown that this coming generation, I don't know what letter they are,
Mhm.
that they're way less interested in buying counterfeit products, and they're also way more concerned with the environmental effects. And
Yeah.
so, there's was a Levi's commercial that focused on the longevity of their products. The fact
Hmm.
that their jeans, withstand the test of time. And so you wouldn't be purchasing 5 pairs of jeans. And that's resonating with this younger generation, which is heartening. I
Yeah.
think that we are replacing ourselves with some better and more informed consumers.
Well, that's good. I would, based on what I know from my son and his friends, I think that fits with what I've seen. They do seem to be much more brand conscious and know what they want, and substitutes are not really they're gonna catch their interest too much.
Hmm.
And when they are making a decision to go with a substitute, they very consciously know that they're going with a substitute. So they're informed purchasers, you might say.
Hmm.
So that is all good. But let me ask you a question. Before we run out of time, I might want to make sure I get this in, because this is something with the patent world. I know that there are some countries that um, enforce, I guess maybe not enforce is the right word. I'll let you characterize or pick the right word,
Hmm.
but they consider design patents as they're seizing or enforcing what's going through the borders. But I don't
Hmm.
believe the US does that. But I think, at least in the past, I know in the past there has been legislation about that in Congress. I don't know whether there's legislation currently to give the border protection ability to consider design patents. Can you give us a lay of the land, what's going on globally, and where we stand in the U.S. currently?
Sure. So, the vast majority of nations and customs unions around the world generally do enforce patents at the border. I haven't done an extensive research looking into which ones do not. As you mentioned, the US does not. We have a different mechanism where a patent owner would have to go to the International Trade Commission
Mm.
and get something called an exclusion order, and that would direct customs to exclude merchandise. And nobody knows for sure why this is. Historically, we've never been given the statutory authority to enforce patents at the border. And as you mentioned, there has been legislation. The Counterfeit Goods Seizure Act of 2019 was the most recent. And I was at IPEC, which is the White House IP office. I was there at the time, and I did feel it had momentum,
Mm-hmm.
but it hasn't moved. So it is, I think, technically still under consideration, but there hasn't been any legislative activity in that regard. It is
And that
important to
was
note.
that was during the Trump administration, right? Where
Mhm.
it had some,
Yes.
yeah, because I think it did have momentum, and then all of a sudden it just didn't happen.
So as Ken mentioned on the last panel, customs and the government, just we've had a lot of interaction with automobile manufacturers
Mm-hmm.
in regards to anti-counterfeiting, and there's a number of reasons for that. They are very active. It is a major health and safety, and we do have U.S. Automobile companies that we care very much about, and so they routinely lobby for design patent protection at the border because so many of their vehicle parts are covered by a design patent.
Right.
But as I mentioned, it never kind of gained momentum. So that's every year, they make this argument. It didn't gain momentum until that 2019 act, where I felt that was a time in history where it had the most legs, if it
Yeah.
was going to go anywhere. And I actually, it's interesting that in the United States, it is not a criminal violation.
Mm.
Patent infringement is not criminalized. And I actually was looking to see what people were saying about this. And you had there was a IP
There
Watchdog
was.
conversation where you opined about why it isn't a criminal violation in the United States. But I mean, that's one way to look at why we don't have, the border enforcement of it, is that it copyright infringement and trademark infringement in the United States, it is a criminal violation under certain circumstances. And so it kind of, the government takes it, I think, a little bit more seriously.
Yeah. I got to go back and look at that article because things may have changed. And I think I was, and when I wrote that, I think it was, believe I said that it may be time to start to think about making it criminal. And, but now I'm more convinced that there needs to be some, because I think the whole idea of why, there are criminal penalties, and they get very rarely enforced, right? Let's be honest, in the copyright world, is because
Mm-hmm.
there's so many people out there doing this, and like any Joe Schmo can do a tremendous amount of damage just being malicious.
Mm-hmm.
There can be really malicious actors that cause a massive amount of damages, and they can be judgment proof. And up to this point in the patent world, that has not really been the case. Usually it's large companies
Mm-hmm.
versus large companies, or large company versus smaller company. But there's now, what we're seeing is a lot of independent inventors and individuals who are inventors, and then people are just destroying them by
Mm-hmm.
selling online these counterfeit goods, because they use exactly the same trademarks that these people have, and ripping off their products and infringing their patents. So it is maybe not the same, but it is destroying these people who have no real ability to fund a patent infringement case, but they have a product that they could be making a good living on, but for
Mm-hmm.
this massive infringement online. It's a complicated system, I suppose. And I don't know. I mean, maybe this is an interesting question. How has the pandemic changed, or will the pandemic change this? I mean, because there's so much talk about bringing, just in the State of the Union, bring back manufacturing to America. There's been a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people talking about that. But now with President Biden mentioning that, and you see Intel moving chips back to Ohio, it's going to take years to build those factories. But do you have a sense that things are going to be changing on the supply chain?
Yes, I mean, again, for in my personal capacity, yes,
Mm-hmm.
I definitely can see that happening. And from a legislative perspective, I think there's going to be uh, enhanced focus on seizure of exportations. Because if we're going to be more of a manufacturing hub, we kind of have to take responsibility, for exports, just like we ask our trading
Mm-hmm.
partners all the time, to be enforcing IP at the border as robustly upon export as they do upon import. Our seizure authorities are just stronger in regard to imports, and I think I could see that changing. Like
Mm-hmm.
an exact parity being matched up, so that exactly what we do for a violative importation, we're going to do for a violative exportation.
Mm-hmm. So, what advice do you have for IP owners so they can maximize their protection at the border?
So there's a couple of things, and you brought up the issue with patents. And so one way that we've seen patent owners do the best that they can with the current US legal system is that you could get a product configuration trademark for the three-dimensional design, if we're talking about design patents. And that's something the automotive industry has done. They've trademarked a whole bunch of their three-dimensional products that are often counterfeited, like vehicle grills, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Or copyright protection is another avenue. There's ample case law demonstrating that a three-dimensional article derived from a two-dimensional work is still covered by the protected copyright. And we do make, a number of seizures of articles, derived from a video game or a movie. So that's another, you could look to other places and other parts of the law to get protection over what you seek protection of. So I would start there, but my biggest piece of advice, and I said it, on the previous panel, is that look at customs, start in China, look at, work with customs at a transshipment point, and then of course work with US customs.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think Paolo brought it up, in different customs unions, it's easy. So like in EU, it's a one-stop shop for, getting your IP protected in all of the different countries. The Middle East has the GCC. So you should look in to see whether that also is a one-stop shop for kind of registering your intellectual property with the different countries in the union. And this should be done like at a minimum. And I think people are just learning about it now. There hasn't been really an increased kind of emphasis on customs enforcement and how important it is to a brand until recently, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and the reason why we were talking about design patents, just so everybody knows, I suspect most people will know, is it's much easier if you have a design patent for the person at the border to look at the picture and then look at the product and say, oh, well, this is the same thing. It's the same reason why in the U.S. it's much easier to get a temporary restraint. You can actually get a temporary restraining order with a design patent, and that's why you see at some of these CES shows, for example, they'll send a district court judge in Nevada will send out the marshals to raid a booth at CES or something like that. So design patents are very important, and I think more people should be using the Hague system to get design patents. They're easy to get worldwide, and that gives you that tool at the various ports all around the world,
Mm-hmm.
wherever they may be, to use them as a tool. And there's a variety of other reasons. I don't want to sidetrack us here, but do you have any other thoughts that you want to give people before we wrap up here this conversation? What should they be doing? How should they be interfacing? And actually, we did have one question I wanted to ask you here too. We had somebody that asked a question about why does it take so long for customs to notify about a seizure. They had a situation where there was a seizure, and then they didn't get notified for 2 years, and then after that they still haven't heard anything. Is that because of why? Why is that? I mean, in the panel before, I think it was mentioned that, or it sounded like customs is investigating and comes back to the owner when there's a need for more information. Is that how that
Mm-hmm.
works?
Yeah, I mean, so it's in our regulations that the IP owner gets notification within 30 days of seizure.
Uh-huh.
And of course, there could be outlaw. I've never heard of 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard of that it would take 2 years. I mean, now they've transitioned to a completely electronic notification system. Like it used to be by certified mail. And you could imagine
Right.
how slow and spotty that is. But now they're doing it by email, that all the seizure notices are automatically sent
Mm-hmm.
in bulk. So as I mentioned, there's like certain brands that get, dozens a day. And so they'll get one email per day that has all of the notices of seizure attached. So that is, I've never heard of it taking 2 years. I
Yeah.
think that something must have just, like I said, there could be outlier
Yeah.
cases for sure.
Yeah. So the ordinary course is the brand owner gets notice within 30 days. And
Mm-hmm.
then after that, is the brand owner generally kept up to date, or do they just get notified when you need help from them?
So a lot of times brand owners are not contacted and prior to a seizure, and they'll just get the notice of seizure.
Okay.
And so I always tell them that you still have rights at that time. So you could always ask fines, penalties, and forfeiture, who are the ones who issued the notice of seizure. You can always ask them for images or a sample. And if it's readily available, they will provide it. It is May, so Customs is not obligated to do this, but they oftentimes do.
Hmm.
Um, and there was another part of your question that I thought was interesting, about the brand owners, but the U.S. is unique in that our officers make the determination. So when I think they call them like 100 footers. If Rolex is spelled with two X's, they don't need to reach out to Rolex for authenticity
Yeah.
assistance, and so Rolex would just get a notice of seizure.
So, and a lot of those brands actually come in and teach or train or offer
Mhm.
some assistance to the customs folks. Is that correct?
Mhm. Yeah, and so post pandemic, though, all of those things are going to happen again. The trade days,
Yeah.
major field offices have trade days where brand owners can go, and physically show the officers their products and how to distinguish genuine from non-genuine. And I mentioned in the earlier panel, you could do this online. There is a mechanism where you can
Mm,
deliver a product identification training online.
hmm. Yeah.
So, but yeah, getting involved is just the best way.
Yeah, and and you just have to factor this in, because I didn't mention this in the last panel, but whenever I talk about counterfeiting and counterfeiters, I always like to use the analogy of your home. If your door is wide open and nobody's home and you don't have a dog, then your house is more likely to get robbed if there's somebody in the neighborhood looking for a house to be robbed than the house
Hmm.
that's locked up, that has ADT security signs around, and that has a barking dog. I mean, what
Hmm.
you need to do is make your house less of a target. And that's the way that you need to operate when you're a brand. You need to make your brand less of a target. And the way you do that is by having a robust enforcement,
Hmm.
and that means being
And
involved from
and
day one.
also on that point, another like really sage piece of advice, well, I think it's sage, is that the brand owners that have most success with customs, with homeland security investigations, and with DOJ prosecutors are the ones that have a zero tolerance policy. So, and
Hmm.
that begins at the border enforcement level. So, we will not negotiate, we will not strike a deal with the importer to allow this infringing import. We will not sign up this party as a licensee going forward. There are brands that just zero tolerance. We will not capitulate in any way.
Right.
If customs has detained something that is violative, we are going to allow customs to dispose of that shipment. And those are the easiest right holders to deal with, and that it's the easiest enforcement case for the officers to make. They know already in their head, that this right holder takes enforcement seriously and is going to support our actions.
Mm. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, that's probably a great way to end. That was a good piece of advice, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. So I think we've had a great conversation about um, counterfeits, and I really, really appreciate you joining us here today. And I can't thank you enough for joining us on so many of our programs. And I'm happy to tell our audience that Alaina has already agreed to join us in Dallas in September. Of course, I have to we'll go through the proper invitation processes,
Yeah.
uh, but she's available, and so looking forward to seeing you. Hopefully before, but if not, we'll see you in person in Dallas in September.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. And
Enjoy the rest of the program.
thanks. We will.